NFL Draft Bible, State of Football. We're back here. Ryan Roberts at Rise and Draft on Twitter. I got David Turner at Mav Sports and Mr. John Murphy at DraftGM13 joining me as we continue our weekly conversation talking the state of NFL, college football, NFL draft, even from a scouting perspective. I have two men who have a ton of experience in the realm. David, first time with us this week, man. How is the West Coast life for you, my friend?
West Coast life is actually a lot better than your Jersey life right now. I mean, it's hot as heck. We got 111 out here in Arizona, consistent for the next month, it seems. But early morning, but we're up and doing it, baby.
You have any hurricanes out there right now, David?
No, you know what? It's pretty much just sunny skies and hot. I mean, it's a typical Arizona summer.
And John Murphy live with us from the Canadian world. John, how is everything on your end, my friend? Nice to have you back again.
No problem. Great seeing you guys. I think I'll get a little bit of the action you got yesterday later on in the afternoon, which will be pretty fun considering I'm 5 minutes from the water. So anytime there's a thunderstorm in Toronto, it's some great viewing as long as the hail and others stay far away.
Yeah, and I want to say real quick, everybody that is watching on Twitter, on YouTube, on Twitch, we are live all week now for the rest of the time. We have the option of fielding live questions from you. So if you want to put them into the chat, feel free to throw them in. We're talking everything again from NFL, college football, NFL draft perspective. Wanted to start because I woke up this morning. I'm an old man. Me and David talked about this a little bit. I woke up this morning with a text from John Murphy about Micah Parsons. Obviously, that news broke right before I went to bed. So now we have Caleb Farley, Virginia Tech opting out. Rashad Bateman from Minnesota. We talked about that yesterday. Now Micah Parsons, who some already are kind of whispering, maybe the best defensive player in the draft for next year, 2021. So quick reaction to that, John. We're seeing some great football players opting out here. Do you think that, again, as we kind of talked about yesterday, is this a sign of things to come, or is this just the top-level guys deciding, their future a little earlier here?
Yeah, I mean, again, we talked about yesterday, the factor that we still don't know if the conference play, is that all you're getting? Are you only getting your 10 games this year? When you see 5 other teams in your conference having struggles, containing it already, there, and you're at Penn State and you're hearing what you probably heard you could have been a first-round pick last year, and for whatever reasons – you decided to stay at Penn State for your senior year. That's a lot to ask of a kid not to do what he ended up doing. If this follows through and is true, in all likelihood, for sure, a first-round pick, and how much higher from there, we'll all see. I think that, it becomes a real interesting scenario in the scouting realm to say, if I'm watching junior tape only and there's no senior tape and there may not be bowl game and that type of stuff, and then how are you going to do and run the combine if any of this is still sort of running around, in time frames of what we're, hearing that we keep being told, wait till that second wave, and the second wave is going to be October to January, February during the cold winter months. Last time I looked, usually the combine has some, interesting weather variables to it, especially Indianapolis in March. How are you keeping everybody safe? How is everyone away from each other? And if the only thing you're seeing out of a guy in his senior year is at the combine or at a pro day, and if you're not allowed to do, individual visits and things like that, it'll become very interesting to see how next year's draft is impacted similarly, but different, from this year's, because at least you got full seasons, all-star game, and then shut down. If some of these guys are shutting it down from the start, well, then you better have some pretty damn good junior and sophomore film.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And it's when we talked about, some of the smaller school guys this year, right? It was just one less opportunity they had with the pro days and all-star circuits, all that type of stuff. Obviously, this is a completely different animal because we're talking about a full season. Well, I don't even know if it's going to be a full season. So we're talking just some tape potentially. David, it's an uncertain world, man. This is your first day on this week. So give us some perspective here. What do you think that this is going to be a running trend, kind of like what John was saying there? Do you think that this is handicapping some of these guys for declaring and missing out on maybe a few games at least of more tape? What is kind of your perspective on this trend that we're seeing?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about an Alden Smith, type player, then you're talking about a guy who missed his senior year but still went in the first round because of an injury, right? So again, is it unheard of that we watch people that only played a few games and then still get drafted high because of their junior tape? No, I mean we've seen that, but it's mainly been due to injury, not a pandemic and a excuse me, in an opt-out type season. You know, the only other, I don't want to call it opt-out, but is when Marcus Peters got suspended from University of Washington due to disciplinary actions. And he still went in the first round. It's just a situation when you look at it, guys. Uh, it it's going to be personal. Every one of these decisions is going to be personal. I don't personally think sports should be the priority for our society right now and for all this stuff that's going on. And when I look at baseball, which have much smaller rosters, and they've only been active for 13 games now, and you see two teams already having to opt out of some games because they had to run through their clubhouses. I mean, how do you do that to college kids? How do you tell a college kid that's, a young man between 18 and 22, and you make your living, or you want to make your living playing professional sports at a very high level, at the highest level there is, and demand so much out of your body to come in and possibly catch a disease that we don't know what the long-term health effects are. We don't know if it does scar the lungs, like we're starting to hear. How is that scarring going to affect everybody who gets it? Some people, I have one friend, he wound up on a ventilator. Okay, 34 years old, very high. He was a linebacker in the league for a while, and he got it, and he wound up on a ventilator. I have another friend who works for the Raiders in the front office. He's athletic, but he's not that high of an athlete, and he got it, and he said I had like one day of body aches, and then the rest of the time I was good. But you just don't know how it's going to hit you. It's so young. It's 8 months in, and we're trying to dictate or predict how this is going to affect everybody. So do I see a run on these high level players? I think if the agents are in their ear and the agents are like, listen, kid, it's not going to affect your draft stock. Listen, you're going to be fine. Don't go back. It's not worth the risk. Save yourself for, like what Murphy said, if we can get the combine going, if we can get pro day going, if we get an all-star game going. Listen, if this guy sits out and then he winds up going to the Senior Bowl or somewhere and perform, I mean, people are going to be like, oh, sitting out, he's just fine. He knocked the rust off. He's fine. And they're going to take him where he needs to go. If there's nothing and you don't see any more film on him, one of the big concerns that I've talked to many GMs, and John as a GM, you'll say this, is what condition am I getting the athletes in right now? Gyms have been closed around this country for 4 to 5 months. I know people say the world's open to go run hills and do push-ups, and there's only so much Spartan training style stuff you could do but you still need to get in the gym and push weight to be ready for football, especially the big guys. So it's like, what shape am I getting the players in? If they cancel seasons and you don't know how this guy's played football in a year, how do you know what shape he's going to be in when you get him? Mm-hmm. And then again, if you catch COVID and you get through it and everything's right, how do you know he's going to be able to return to training right away? Because if it's affecting the lungs, because this is a respiratory disease, can they get their cardio shape in? Can they still run? Can they still do all this? We just don't know. And like we were talking before we came on, guys, all three of us catch it. All three of us are going to have a different reaction. Mm-hmm. Our bodies are going to have a different – it's just like the flu. We all catch the same strand of flu. Ryan, you and I might be over the toilet for 2 days. Murphy might have just had the sniffles, but it was the same strand. We just don't know enough. So to say I do see this is going to be the snowball effect. We're only August 5th. So, yeah, I think this is going to be a snowball effect, especially when we get closer to September, because most of these colleges, if I'm reading it right, their first game's not till the end of September, right? So, yeah, I think they're going to be a rash of – and a lot of parents you're going to see coming out, I'm not letting my kid play. It's not going to happen. They're going to step in and pull it. So, I don't know. I mean, that's my take on it. That's how I see it. I just see that people are going to be really cautious in moving forward. And I think it's really hard for college athletes to really, buck up and and sprint into, the COVID. A professional athlete, you're getting paid to do it, and you're getting paid a lot of money to play a game. So I could see them saying, well, it's worth the risk.
Yeah.
Little different, I think, being in a college environment. As we spoke about, if a lot of your courses and things are going to be run, similar to style like this, or on a Zoom, on a platform type basis, not in the classroom. If you're telling kids that they're used to certain habits, they're used to, you get up, your breakfast is at a place, your workout time is at a certain time and place. You start shifting those gears and changing that stuff. You're leaving kids open to a lot of time, and there's only so many video games and so much stuff they're going to do without interacting with each other, even if it's about their sport or just socializing or whatever. And you saw yesterday, we were talking about it, one of the players at Eastern Kentucky talking about how none of the rules are all being followed. This morning, right now, as we're on, UConn has announced they've canceled their season, as we're doing this. So, I think you're looking at, a lot of those variables, and then a lot of them to say, like, would you really think that you would get, if we've been struggling to get top 20 draft picks to play in the Senior Bowl after their bowl game, after a whole regular season? How easy or hard will it be for the NFL, the agents, and the Senior Bowl to collectively get guys who have not been on the field since whenever they shut her down, and then come back in January of 2021 and jump into the fray and play and practice at a high level in that environment, to know that really most guys who go to the Senior Bowl, unless you're for sure a high round guy, if you suffer any kind of real injury there, it could be catastrophic to your, where you get picked.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I think I'll be really interested in is, when you're evaluating players, anything on their medical then gets evaluated and is hypersensitive, in the sense of, if you pulled your hamstring each year, it's an issue. If you rolled your ankle each year, if you had a shoulder issue, or anything consecutively, will we find out over time, like what you guys have mentioned, if somebody has had the COVID and then has any of the minor issues that are seemingly minor to any of us maybe, but we've already seen the Red Sox have to shut down one of their pitchers for having a minor heart ailment afterwards that needs time to clear up. If you suffer it, will there be a medical mark from now on for having had COVID, or someone in your or somebody that you're close to, things like that, knowing that in all likelihood it's going to cycle around your family and friends again, if you have a parent, if you've had it yourself, and then the kids that have stayed clean and away from it.
Well, that's interesting, really interesting, Murph. And here's why I'm saying this. I had a conversation with a couple agents not too long ago, and we found one of their clients was in a room with the running back coach, and the running back coach had tested positive for it. So then automatically the player got put on the list of a COVID list. Now in the NFL, the COVID list is just one list right now. So it's not a list of, he was exposed to it. It's just he's on the COVID list. So now the agent was worried about exactly what you're saying. Are people going to mark him as someone who has COVID, so then maybe less likely to bring him in or something? And he didn't have it. He literally didn't have it. He just got exposed to it. And then I have another agent whose player has it, and he's on the same list. So he's like, they're like, we have these players on these lists, and what's the stigma of these players now? Is it the scarlet letter, or is it not? And I think, as a guy, you're a general manager, as a guy who's a personnel director before, an assistant general manager before, I look at, like you said, you have to know who's going to be on the field each and every week. And we're seeing cases where people catch COVID twice now, like because of the mutational strands. I've heard of cases where people catch it twice, and they're trying to tell us that there's a vaccine coming. And again, the best vaccine expert that we know is Fauci, and he's saying, well, early next year. March is early next year. April would be considered early next year. We don't know what early next year would be. And then once you get a vaccine, who can take it? What are the side effects? Is it going to be like one of these TV commercials where there's a list of side effects that you could choke on? And people like me who have other conditions, can I take it? Oh, I can't take it, so now I can't get a job because I can't get the vaccine. And you don't want to worry about me having COVID and blah, 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 because now I become a liability because I don't get it. Now we're segregating people because they can't develop the immune system to COVID. Like it's such a young disease, and we're having such a young or overreaction to it, and we're trying to rush back to things way too fast without the proper knowledge, which is concerning, not only on a college level but even the professional level. Like, look at the Patriots; they've had 7 guys opt out, I think, and it's like, Murph, you were talking about it. If you had 7 guys opt out as a general manager, you got to shake your head and understand it. You're like, hey, it's a personal decision for all these young men. But at the same time, for your organization and for you to keep your job, you got to field a team that can win. If the season's on, your goal is to win. You got to do it. That's your job. And how do you do that in this climate? And now you have a lot of proven assets coming into your building. You don't know where they've been, who they are, who's going to test positive, who's not. I mean, and you're piecemealing a team together, and the league's, looking at, hey, we got to put a good product on the field.
Yeah. And I think that's what's so interesting is there's so many layers and there's so many different perspectives to this too. Because I wanted to take this conversation to the scouting side of everything, right? Like, we're talking about these guys having 1 year less of film or at least several games. For John, and I'll go to you here for this one. So like when the upside attribute, right, of a player comes into perspective, right? So if we're talking about like a Micah Parsons, who let's say was 19 years old last year as a sophomore, right? Like, was he impressive? Absolutely. But I think the thing that really stands out to him, and even a guy like a Penei Sewell out of Oregon, is like, how good can they be? Or how much more now without that extra year to see how they have developed? Are you banking on that potential, or does that change your formula to how you scout it all?
Right, and that's also something that I was going to bring up is, will that have another effect? And that other effect being, we've heard the teams in the leagues going into the bubbles, and even baseball that didn't, talk about Greg Popovich, talk about Alvin Gentry, talk about in baseball, there's a couple of hitting coaches and pitching coaches and bullpen coaches who, in their mind, were older, more likely to be susceptible to something, and then the carryover effect of being worried about an older staff member possibly getting this and affecting themselves and others. That'll be really an interesting thing to see at all levels of sport. Does that start having people, change some of their hiring habits? Because a lot of position coaches are not young guys. Over time, a lot of them, that have assumed really good roles, in the league. A lot of the people that are in personnel offices, that have, grown to, different jobs, and then over time are on the other side of things. What will happen to people if this continues the way that it's gone? Will there be a lot of people and organizations that are worried about having anybody that's, on the plus side, anybody with plus characteristics, and stuff, the way that they talked about it in the bubble? I mean, they cleared Alvin Gentry at 60 whatever years old, literally days before the Pelicans, were going in. There were baseball coaches that were opt out, but the opt out came because of them having, plus characteristics to say if they were to get it, they could get it much worse. And then the worry, of the organization that could linger or be in a building, that's something to think about. That is, I think, experience in this scenario would be really, really key to say. And I remember it, and he'll probably laugh because he'll remember it. I was at a specific event and reporting to Dave, and I was giving literally probably what the guy ate for breakfast, his shoe size, what color socks he was like. I was over, like, I'm really young in it, and I'm reporting to somebody who knows exactly what I got to about 8 paragraphs earlier, and he's like, Murph, okay, next guy, I got it. I know who that is. Thanks. You gave me enough sample. He could instantly know, okay, like that's not a guy that we're interested in. Go to the next player. Now, that type of expertise is going to be really important, because if you're looking at a Micah Parsons, if you're looking at a D2 kid that you only have junior, you're going to have to be able to see something or watch something and have it catch your eye and be like, okay, Micah Parsons reminds me of this guy. And then roll with the strengths, or if you see weaknesses that you're like, the problem with those weaknesses are they don't normally hit when they have those issues. I think that's going to be really, really key in evaluating things, is having people with that experience that when you give them less, they can still come out with more. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times the more is what drives the answer. But if you can have people who can take the less but still come out with the right answer, that's going to be really key to these organizations.
Dude, I'll tell you, and yes, I do remember that, Murph, by the way. And I remember exactly what you were saying. I was like, I'm done with this conversation. Knock it off. But, God, I was like over a decade ago now. So anyways, but I would tell you a story. Gettleman shared with me one time. He was at a game and he was scouting a linebacker, and the linebacker was a smaller player, smaller level player. And the first half, the kid didn't do really well. And all the scouts are like, why are we here? Like, what's going on? And all of a sudden in the second half, the kid is a pass rusher. Kid comes off the edge, turns the corner, bends, everything. And then Gettleman packs up his stuff after that rep and says, I'm out of here, guys. And they go, why? Don't you have to finish watching it? And he goes, no. I just saw what I need to see. If he can do that once, we just need to make sure he can do it consistently. And those are the lessons I take for me, is like, if a kid has done it once, then the coaches have to get consistency out of the kid. Then it becomes a psychological test, basically, like, do you think this kid has it in him to be consistent? Because physically you just saw him do what he needed to do to be successful at the next level. But now, does he have what it takes between the ears and in the gut and in the heart to consistently drive that same product out of his own body every time? And do you have the coaches that are going to be able to get that out of him every time? And that's the mixture in the pot that people don't talk about a lot. And so, Ryan, when you were talking about or asked the question how this is going to affect scouting, I think John really hit a lot on really good point on the expertise of individuals that are in the building. So when you see guys like the Panthers have a very expert level staff, and the Giants who have had an expert level staff, now they went a little younger this year. It's going to be interesting to see how that happens and how that works through the process, because you can't go out and check the boxes. You can't go out and send a bunch of fact collectors out to the world right now and say, okay, go collect the facts, and then we'll put you in this training system that looks normal, and we'll strain out the people that don't match up. Because you're not going to, again, colleges aren't going to let scouts walk in August and then let them go to 7 campuses in a day or in a week to, check out people and go in and out of places, because you could be a ticking time bomb. You're not showing symptoms. You've been in 14 schools in, 18 days or whatever. And, we're not going to allow that. So those fact collector young scouts that just don't know yet, it's not their fault. They haven't seen enough. How valuable are they now versus, like what John said, the veteran guys? And also, are we going to start seeing some ageism on the sidelines in coaching? Are you going to see more of the veteran coaches up in the booths communicating down to the sideline, where younger coaches, they feel the younger coaches can get sick and recover? But is that what we're going to see? Because a lot of the O-line coaches that are really good in this league, they're not youngsters.
Yeah.
They're old guys. And how are they going to get that? But as far as evaluating the talent, what your point or what your question was, right? Evaluating the talent, it is going to be like what Murphy said. You're going to have to lean on your experience to know, hey, that kid did it for 8-10 games as a junior. I'm going to say, yes, he can do it. The weakness stuff is a strength that we can build with more strength training, but also you're not going to next year's draft. You won't, if this all goes the same way we're seeing it trending, you're not going to have instant coffee. All these kids are going to have to percolate for a year, maybe 2 years, even 3 years to get the most out of their body. And then that's all assuming in 2021 we have a vaccine that works for everybody and we can get back to normal practices. If we see this strand, or we see this disease affect us, this virus affect us for 2 years or so before we get everything worked out, you're going to have that supply chain is already broken, but it's going to damn well be busted for 2 years.
Yeah.
And then how does the NFL respond? And like Ryan, I think you were talking about, even the colleges, how do they respond? Is it more scholarships? Is it, giving more eligibility years so people can stay in school longer to try to get the tape and outlast this disease so they can maximize their draft stock? How's the ripples effects? I mean, everything happens with a ripple effects. Well, we've dropped the bomb of COVID. Now all the ripples are having to be decided and figured out. And I don't know, these young men are in really tough spots. They're in really. Do I opt out this year, not play, and then roll the dice that I'm still going to get a high draft pick, or do I play and catch COVID? And everybody says I'm a young man, I'm a young viral man, so I'll respond and rebound. But is that true? Not always. And I was going to go back to a point Murphy was making, you're talking about these 22-year-old kids. I saw, I think it was East Lansing opened up bars for a week or something, and one of the most popular bars in East Lansing got packed with kids, and no one was wearing a mask, and everybody was just out. And from that, they've already traced, I think, over 100 cases of COVID coming from that one bar that one night, and then they shut it down because they're like, "Hey, you guys weren't paying attention to what we told you to do." Well, damage was already done. It was like one bar, one night. And these are kids who think they're bulletproof anyways. And they're being told, even if you get it, you'll recover. But you're bringing it into the building. You're bringing it around all the coaches. You're bringing it around the trainers. You want to talk about coaches? Talk about some of the best trainers, athletic trainers in the business. They're older guys, older gals, that they can't have it. I mean, I know the UTEP trainer really well, and Dawn is a wonderful woman, but she's got some concerns that she can't catch this, and you got a bunch of kids going in there, and now you're going to force her into retirement or something because she can't do it. Now you're limiting. I think she's been there 25 years, and she's a head trainer, one of the only head trainer women in college football, and you're going to say she can't do her job anymore? I mean, the ripple effects all the way through the decision making, it goes beyond coaches and players. It goes beyond just the business of football, because there's so many people that get affected by this.
And John, we have a couple questions now coming in. Shout out to Jay Blaze NYC for throwing in the first question. Could next year be some kind of red shirt for the Parsons or Sewell because of their age and only 2 years on the field? So does that lack of experience maybe cause for you to think maybe redshirt year as a rookie? And maybe add on to that, John, do you think that drastically drops their stock, the fact of that might be in some type of consideration due to age and experience level?
Well, I think that the thing that would answer that would be, first off, where in the draft do they end up going? What team did they end up going to? And if you're seeing that there was definitely a strong group of people that would have hoped that with the opt-outs happening, that after the opt-outs all ended, this week, that the NFL would then have looked at it and said, okay, instead of giving the Patriots more money to use here, slide this year's money back and throw that on to next year's, so that there's not such a, gigantic shift, in things, to be like, hey, there's a possibility where teams were hoping next year's cap was going to be 190, 200, it could be 180 or less. And if it is, well, then these draft picks are going to not only, be worth their weight in gold, but they're going to have to play, because their contracts are going to be more valuable, and you're going to see a upheaval, of the middle, the middle ranks, the rank and file guys in the NFL that make up, the middle to back end of your roster are all going to be under duress, in terms of, what you're able to afford to pay to those guys. So I think you'll see some of that inexperience. And now, will it change if you have a full off season and all the rookie time and a training camp and preseason games? That would allow these guys to get closer, to being able to do something, even if it is in a role player in special teams, in a rotation, as a rookie, and instead of thinking they're just jumping into the lineup. But regardless, the how much the money aspect of things changes in the NFL. I mean, a $10 or $20 million, alteration to what was expected when most of the clubs are already going to be flush up against it. You're definitely going to see that if you're this, certain teams that could, end up in the wrong spot. A kid like Parsons, if he's on the Cowboys next year, you're going to have to play. A kid like that, if you're on the Eagles and you have the high-end volume guys that you have under contract, there's likelihood that your rookies are going to have to play and potentially play in place of, a journeyman vet or a third, fourth, fifth year NFL player that just becomes not affordable if all the salary caps get rolled back substantially the way that people are talking.
Well, and you can start seeing some of that forecasting going on even now with some of the decision making for the NFL. And it almost looks like makes the Minnesota Vikings, who took all those draft picks this year, look like geniuses, because now they had like 13 draft picks and they're all assigned, and they got those contracts for the next 4 to 5 years. So it's like, well, we're already ahead of you guys because we took all these picks. But other veteran teams that were trying to make one last grasp and charge for the championship, so they spent in free agency and they went out and traded some picks and traded up and got some guys, thinking, okay, we got the key components. Like Murphy said, next year those key components aren't affordable anymore.
Shout out to Rick Spielman. I think David, you were around Rick at one point, right?
Down in Miami. Yeah, him and George Payton down in Miami. So, yeah, I saw they're working on a contract extension. I was happy for him because he's one of the best men I've ever met in my life.
Yeah, he's done a great job, obviously, continuing to readjust that roster, even with some players obviously leaving. And I think that's one of the interesting parts of just the general manager and front office. The free agency era has really made it such a evaluation process, year-to-year basis. We talk about how it used to be. David, you mentioned, though, and I wanted to get into this because, we talked about this a little bit before we started, and you mentioned it pretty recently, the other side of things, right? The college football programs now, there's things up in the air now. Is there going to be an additional year of eligibility? How's that going to affect recruiting? Is that 85 scholarship number going to be increased? Is there going to be players that are going to be rescinded scholarship offers because they don't have room on the roster now? How much is this going to shake up the recruiting world and how a team on the college level now is going to build their roster and add student athletes to their team?
And again, that's a ripple effect like we've seen this morning. UConn's canceling their season, right? Like that's a whole program in a division that is canceling their season. So how to say it's going to affect recruiting and everything? So if they don't take that 85 and extend it to 100 or something, right? But they do extend eligibility, so to retain the players they already have. Now, yeah, the next generation of recruits, you ain't getting scholarships. You're becoming preferred walk-ons, and the promises are going to be until this guy graduates. Then once that scholarship opens up, it's yours, kid. But then the kids have the transfer rule in their pocket, and they can go into the portal. So now you go, okay, that scholarship, that kid that was supposed to leave with the scholarship didn't leave. Well, now the kid can leave in the portal and go somewhere else that it does have a scholarship for him. So the chess match becomes beyond 3-dimensional. You're talking 5 and 6-dimensional when you're talking about it. And the what if scenarios are just mind-boggling and will blow anybody's mind if you really sit and think about it and go deep into it. And again, I think, Ryan, what I'm trying to say is that you just have to wait and see how this works, because if if UConn is the first domino.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see the NC, and I'm waiting to see what the NC2A commissioner says, the overall commissioner, because and especially after seeing that news today where UConn's tapping out, I'm like, that's a big program that just tapped out. It's not a smaller program. UConn could probably afford the testing with their funding up there, and I understand like the smaller programs can't afford all the testing, like we were talking about the kicker earlier. That their school can't afford everything, but a team like UConn can. Now, as NC2A, if I understand, they're a governing body that is about fairness and making everything equal and everything the same, and so no one team has an advantage over another, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to operate in the same rules. Well, now in recruiting, how can you let the rest of UConn's conference play? Because now they all have a recruiting advantage over UConn because they said, well, we played last year and UConn didn't. Yeah. And, if you come here, kid, we can guarantee you yours a season because even during COVID, we played. Well, that's a recruiting advantage because they're going to so you're going to allow some teams to play, some teams to make their own call, and other teams not. Well, that's an unfair advantage. And from what I understand, the NC2A is all about keeping it as fair as possible. And right there would be a gross violation of keeping it fair because you can't do it, So if teams are opting out of playing, especially bigger programs, you got to look at, as an NC2A, do you just scrap everything and say we're pushing it to the spring? And if you push it to the spring, I guarantee you'll see the NFL push his combine and push the draft back. In the CBA, it does say they can have it as late as July or June or July. So you would see it pushed back till then, and they would still get, again, off-season, Murph, there would be no off-season for these kids. But this year there was no off-season for these kids. So it is what it is, right? And you would push, they'd get a season in the spring, again, assuming we have a safe environment for the kids. So we would see them on the field. We get evaluated. We could run them through a combine. We can we can pull and tug on them to know what injuries are there. We can interview them. It gives you time to do that. As a college program, I had a couple coaches reach out to me and ask that question, lower level colleges, and they said, hey, what's your opinion on us playing in the spring? And, I told them it's not going to hurt the kid in the evaluational process this year because there's the COVID factor. So you can't look at it with normal glasses on. You got to strain this through the COVID glass vision. And when you're putting that vision on, so many schools are canceling seasons. So many conferences are going to push to the spring. Evaluators are going to have to adjust and adapt to that. You can't make the kids adapt to the evaluational process.
And to continue to crunch the numbers, I think another side of it is we're starting to see some of the FCS programs, smaller level guys like a Shane Simpson from Towson transfer to Virginia. We're starting to see the quarterback from Sac State, Kevin Thompson, transfer up to Washington. The number issue, right? Like if these guys are opting out and they're still or technically on the scholarship number, freeing up that scholarship for a kid to come in and help the team potentially is a solution in general. But like, are they strapped to that 85 in that situation? I think that those numbers kind of hurt my head, to be honest, man. I'm just trying to figure out like what the best option is there. We talk about obviously, you want to still give that scholarship to that player because it's not his fault that COVID and everything that's happening. It's not his fault, right? So like obviously he's a student athlete. You're still providing an education. There is so many sides to that argument, but the ability again to maintain a roster, bring in a player that doesn't have an opportunity to hopefully give it an opportunity. There's so many layers. I feel like we could have spent 6 hours just on this topic in general, but I do want to move on just because, David, we talked about UConn. Group of 5, I think, is in a little bit of trouble here. John, I want to talk about that springtime move potentially, though, for some conferences, because David kind of talked about that a little bit. Do you think that's a viable solution? Do you think that is going to hurt any program as far as, again, with the continued opt-out of draft prospects, or do you think that spring is ultimately the best idea to continue to play football potentially?
I think if you get to the point where a legitimate amount of teams say, all right, we're going to pass on this and just go to the spring, you're then going to get like the cause and reaction would be the NFL has no reason right now to say we're going to change or alter anything because there's not enough information. So if all of a sudden you were to say, well, 200 out of these teams, and it's a lot of the variables of teams that have prospects are going to cancel and not play till the spring, well, then the NFL will probably come back and say, well, but we're still going to be playing and doing all-star games in January, or they're going to say, we're going to take that part out of the mix for this year. And instead of the all-star games, we'll just evaluate the film and go to the games that are going to start. You'll do practice in January, start playing, whenever you're going to start playing, and we'll just evaluate that. And maybe we'll have to change and like David said, push the draft, back to a different time and place. Now if they say no, we can't really do that, and if we draft these guys and if you play that college football season in 2021, you're going to be in the 2022 draft. Now you're going to create the time frame where the senior guys that are being told that they're draftable would probably slide toward the draft. And maybe you wouldn't get as many redshirt sophomores and juniors because nobody would really know yet where they stand. So I don't think the NFL moves their calendar or alters anything until they have an idea of, do they need to do that because it's physically possibly affecting the draft by the number of players that are being affected. Because if it's just going to be, all the smaller sections that might try to do something in the spring, if the SEC and the ACC and Notre Dame and, as many of the other big conferences play in the fall, then you'll just see those 40 or 50 out of 700 kids that are playing in the spring. You'll see, like if the Ivy League's going to play in the spring and the draft is going to still be in April, there'll be one or two kids maybe opt out, but it'll have to be an opt out to me based off of the NFL then sharing information to say to those one or two kids, hey, we're in lieu of your season, we're inviting you to the combine in March. They're almost going to have to show their hand that they see them as being prospects, because if not, you're asking, to just leave it on the kids to opt in or opt out based off of no real information would be something difficult. But I think it would be hard to think that a college age kid could go to camp in early 2021, play even a 10-game just conference schedule, and then be prepared to do anything within a month or so of that, to then jump in against grown men who are, in an NFL training camp with no off season. You're getting drafted, no training camp. There'd be no rookie camp. There'd be no downtime. You're going right from, a 10-game schedule into, your first NFL camp, within 4 to 6, 8 weeks maximum, and probably less than that. Would be difficult to imagine what you're doing with those players, the first year physically. And will the NFL hold or push their draft back, when the teams are not going to really want to do that? This is already different. They're going to want to try to keep everything as on par for the future, as possible. And if you pushed guys backwards, and just had a lot of sophomores and juniors stay in school for an extra year, that wouldn't kill the pipeline. It probably wouldn't really hurt any player. It does make them play another year of college rather than their first year getting paid. But they're not going to probably have known that, because it would be those handful of guys that jump out every year that are redshirt sophomores and juniors that no one really has watched yet with a keen eye toward the next year's draft, that in the fall they jump on the screen. They jump out at you when you're watching somebody else, and then they end up declaring or being told that they're viable candidates. But I don't think the NFL will change unless their hand is kind of moved in that direction.
Yeah, and I agree with Murph. If the NFL's hands force that way, it will go that way, and that's why I said the NC2A commissioner will be interesting to see if he tries to keep the playing field fair and dictate there's no college football, or if he allows certain places to play and they pull off a season. And again, just because they get on the field, guys, doesn't mean they're finishing the season, right? Like it doesn't mean, I mean, again, if you have conferences that have been shrunken because certain teams don't want to play or feel it's unsafe to play, and then a rash of COVID cases come out or injuries come out, let's just take the numbers. You want to crunch some numbers. How many players are usually on a baseball team, MLB baseball team? About 25, maybe 30. Okay. Well, we saw 3 people have it for the Marlins. They voted, they played the game. At the end of the day, 17 players came out having it and 2 or 3 coaches. So you're telling me with 3 people having it, 20 people ended up getting COVID, like the infectious ability. Now do the same numbers on a college football team where they have about 100 kids. Okay, so you're telling me that 3 people walk in that room and have it, they don't have symptoms, they don't know, and then all of a sudden that locker room after 2 days, some people start showing signs, they test everybody, and they end up with what, 30, 40 kids having it? I mean, that's the same numbers, right? And now, how do you play a season? Now you have 2-game suspension or 2 weeks where that team is quarantined, so you can't have them on the field not only practicing but playing a game for 2 weeks. Now the whole schedule gets affected. So who's the champion of that league when the next teams got buys? The NFL's facing the same thing. I put it on Twitter the other day. I said, what if you walk in, if you're Drew Brees and you walk in and your left tackle and your starting center the day of the game end up getting COVID and have to sit? If you're Drew Brees and you're facing, Khalil Mack that day, do you get a chance to sit the game and say, I don't feel comfortable playing today?
Yeah.
Someone's like, well, there's injuries all the time, man. You just got to suck it up and play. Nah, you really don't. Being honest with you, when you're Drew Brees, you've made enough money. You can take this one to the house and not even play the whole season. And guess what? Your kids are still eating tomorrow. You still got all your trucks and everything ready to go. When you're Tom Brady, I mean, it's just your wife makes more money than you. So again, your kids are still eating. You don't have to play. And for those loyalists who are like, hey, it's the love of the game. Yeah, it is the love of the game. That's why people play it. You don't play a collision sport unless you love it. You know what I mean? Warren Sapp used to say all the time, they don't pay me to play the game. They pay me to practice. They pay me to show up and do all this grind. If they got to pay you to play, then, man, you're in the wrong business.
Right.
So, what I'm saying here is you got to look at all the factors when you're talking about this COVID thing and the ripple effects. And I don't know if teams like UConn are opting out, how teams like Alabama get to play.
It's a great point. And one thing that I think John really brought up that I think is, I mean, so the transition from college football to NFL, as if that's not great enough, shrinking that window of making that transition, the attrition that goes with that, just playing a season, jumping right into the draft process, right onto the field, that is daunting for any athlete coming out of college, no matter who you are. The question now, David, kind of staying with you here is, if you were advising a potential draft pick, right? If they're making that decision, like, I want to play college football. Trevor Lawrence says, I want to go out on top. I want to come back. And if there is a season, if everything gets pushed to this spring, I still want to play because I have some unfinished business to take care of. Would you advise that person to make that decision? Or are you more on the end of like, hey man, that short-term transition is so tough and so daunting that I'm not sure it's worth it in the end?
Again, it's going to be a case-by-case basis. Because if you're Trevor Lawrence, my advice as a consultant is no, you're sitting, because we're not putting your arm through that. We're just not going to put a quarterback's arm. It's like taking a pitcher and having them pitch, and then, like Murphy said, 6 weeks later, you got to start pitching again, and you don't have the recovery time. It's just not smart. And that's how you make your living. Now, if you're, to me, I think there's certain positions you can do. You can transition and be fine. and there's recovery machines and things nowadays that can help you. Plus, as a rookie, we all know you're almost redshirting next year. So if you're not a key player, if you're a guy who's a 3rd to 7th round type player, you can play. And then, like you said, Ryan, they're going to be mainly a special teamer that first year while they're developing to get ready for their active duty stuff. Okay. But if you're a 1st, 2nd rounder, even into the 3rd round, because like what Murphy said with the salary caps, you're going to be forced into playing a little bit more. You're going to be forced into a starter role, even if you're a 1st round pick next year. So it's harder to say to those 32 young men that are elite players that you definitely know are going in the 1st round, go play the spring season and put that wear and tear on your body, because the recovery time isn't going to be there to respond and recover from it. So it's a case-by-case basis, and it would be an evaluation of their talent on every level for them. Like, if they came to Mav Sports and they're like, hey, we need an honest, unbiased opinion if this kid should play or not, we would break down the tape, we would write the report, and we would make a couple calls and see what the temperature is before we'd give the opinion. But it would have to be case by case. And any kind of quarterback, any of these elite quarterbacks for next year, I don't know how you tell them to play. Now, if they're a question mark quarterback that needs to prove something, they got to play, because you got that question mark on you. And if, again, your eligibility hasn't been extended by a year, and next year's your one-shot kid to make it happen, you got to play. It reminds me of a linebacker. Remember Cody Barton came out of Utah a couple of years ago? Well, Cody, as a junior, got hurt, didn't play a lot, but his senior year, he blew up, had a great senior year. I mean, turned heads. People going into that, I mean, I was a Bledsoe scout in the region at the time. I didn't even have him on the board because he had injury history and he had some things going on. But then I saw him in fall camp and he caught my eye right away. And then I had to write him up. I had to put him on the map for people to go in and see him, because he was really a fantastic young linebacker that was behind some seniors that just played over him. And therefore now, and I think he was a 3rd round pick by the Falcons or something. So, that senior tape for some of these guys really makes their career and puts them in a position to be successful. Whereas other guys, it's not as important. So, it's a case by case kind of breakdown and evaluation.
And John, we talked about how it could affect scouting short-term, long-term a little bit. You guys mentioned, obviously, game visits on the road. How does that affect the infrastructure of a scouting department as far as like job security and from that perspective?
Well, I think that's another part, that you haven't really heard a whole lot right now, right, with teams. And that's usually their biggest, time frame is right after the draft. People's contracts getting extended, other ones moving around. It's been very quiet, in this time frame for a lot of reasons, including the factor that I think teams are not yet sure what they're going to have available to them. And then we mentioned, who or what you would want to have doing the job, depending on how that job is being able to be done in the next calendar year. Because if you just have guys that are good to be on the road because they're just collecting data and sending it back, and then their reports are just really there to have something on file, well, if you don't have that aspect of it and you're not having them out on the road, well then you better have somebody who, if those schools are getting 32 phone calls at minimum, you better have somebody who's making a call to a school or a program who's going to get a call back, because not everybody's going to get a call back now, with the way things are being done. But,
and that relationship's key. That relationship,
exactly, or if they're allowing X number of people in the press box, are you going to be one of them? Are they allowing somebody to drive by, and say, okay, hey, I can't do this, but hey, meet the video guy in the Nebraska parking lot, and grab your zip drive for the day and go over to your hotel and watch it and then drop it back off to us. Yeah, if you have that relationship. If not, you'll be like the Dallas Cowboys, still waiting to get that 1970 whatever film from Alabama A&M that the Steelers never sent you on John Stallworth, and you know how that turned out. And that's that's just what happened. and it would go back to a lot of the old school, ways of doing things. And like I said, the word of mouth and a lot of the water cooler talk and a lot of being able to identify and not look at it and say, hey, there's 700 prospects on the board. You would have to be able to look at that and say, okay, but this is what I like physically out of our guys. So now we can take it down by total and take it down by position and take it down, to a workable number and say, if I have a shorter staff and I have less content, and it really should be driven by the motivation of who are the best fits for our organization, we may have to look at this in a very different way than we have before to make sure we're identifying guys that, fit your content or fit your, what your style of play is and what your coaching staff is looking for, if you're going to have to be adaptable, to those things. And a lot of times that comes down to, with teams in the past, their success rate of where they've hit on players normally is traced back to who was in those areas. Who was the area, why was that team successful with their draft picks in certain areas and not others? Normally, can be traced all the way back to having the right person on the road, being that area scout, doing the legwork on that player. Whereas, teams, have also had inexperienced guys go out for the first time and you send them out west and, well, you're not drafting too many people out west, the first couple of years until they get their feet wet. And I think the funniest one I've ever heard of that is, somebody who Dave also has a very soft spot for, Mr. Al Davis. And there was a time, and this is long ago, so whoever the poor party was that I, will mention not by name, is probably no longer in the business. But there was an area scout in the area with the guy that Al was really focused on to draft very high in the draft. And he said, okay, one more time. I just want to somebody, who has their report? And me, right here. I got it. This is my report right here. And Al Davis basically said, does anybody else got one?
I know the exact story. I know exactly. Anybody else got one? I got one right here. And it's like, okay, so no one. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Here we go.
So, and that just shows you. And again, and a second one that's a little less funny, but but also very true of how teams were. We were at the combine together when Vernon Davis was at the combine, and Vernon passes the 40 line, and everybody's looking at their watches and. Can't imagine that that's what it is. And, basically right at that point in time, they got a phone call, and basically Al wanted immediate results of the vertical and broad, like every other test that he was doing that day. He wanted those results immediately, even though the draft is still months away and you're just inside the RCA Dome and there's nothing beneficial or competitive advantage to having them before you get the sheet. And yet there was a guy that, by position and by the physical numbers that he was putting up, instantly had somebody's attention in their eye. I think that's going to be something that's, extremely crucial. If you're talking about all this adaptability of saying you're already on shortened information, right? A lot of what, current scouting databases will look like are going to have a lot of E's next to it, which means a lot of estimates, not a lot of verified, height, weight, and speeds, not a lot of verified medicals, and things at the moment. If that's how you have to process through, the rest of your season, the teams that are able to fill in those boxes the best are going to be the ones that are light years ahead of everyone else.
Well, think about this, Murph. How do they get the verifieds in the spring? It's usually with National and Bledsoe going out and holding junior days. Well, those junior days didn't happen as much this year, obviously, because of COVID hit. So that those verifieds, like you just said, are now E's. So they didn't get all the information from Bledsoe and National that they usually get from the spring. So they're entering into this scouting system with a bunch of guesstimates already. And now 2 points that I would like to make based off what Murphy just said. First off, a lot of department heads that I've talked to have learned they can do more with less if the guys aren't on the road, and they learned that from keeping the off when they didn't have COVID going on, or when they did have COVID hit them. They put more film on. They watched more film. They felt this year's draft was very strong because they did less with more. Usually we do December meetings. We would go into the office and do draft meetings. They didn't do that. They did things like this, and they did breakout groups where they talked to different people and stuff, and they felt very comfortable with where they were drafting this year. But they had the film to tape to digest. They had that ability to do all that stuff. So, right now, without having that, it's going to be hard. But they have learned they can do less with more. And like Murph said, you go to the old school ways where if I pick up a phone, or even John, you have your connections, you pick up a phone, we're getting calls back. I mean, I've been in this 18 years now. I've made some really good friends. I've been really good connections. People trust that they can tell me stuff on a phone line and it's not going any further. I'm not one of those telephone guys that pick it up and go, "Hey, did you hear this?" It's just not who I am. So they could trust that. I was on the road last year or 2 years ago with a young scout. I'm not going to say the team or anything. And we were we're at Washburn University, and Corey Ballantyne was coming out, smaller school kid, but he had great measurables and things. And at that night, we're sitting at the bar having dinner, and we were talking about it. And he was like, "Oh, that kid's not draftable, this and this and this." And I go, "Kid, understand this. The kid has 32-inch arms. He's going to run a sub 4.5 40. He's getting drafted somewhere, because when you're digging through the trash late in the draft and you don't know who you're going to pick, that kid's measurables are going to stand out." So I was like, for your career, just throw a 6th-round grade on him or 7th-round grade on him, put him in the draft, and your GM's going to like you better. You know what I mean? Because you identify that he might not be your guy. Like you were talking, John, he might not fit your scheme, so he doesn't fit what you want in your organization, but you're identifying the talent as draftable. And see, that's a veteran scout move. It's not covering my butt. It's saying, listen, the kid's draftable. He's just not ours. He doesn't fit us. So he's going to fit somebody. And so you put the draftable grade on him, and you say, okay, and he will get drafted. And he did get drafted in the 6th round. And he went to the Giants, and he was their kind of guy. So as a veteran scout, that's something to identify, that a talent is there. The measurables equal a draft pick, and therefore you put it on so your general manager doesn't see you rejecting all these guys and then they get drafted somewhere. You have to know how to identify a talent the right way. And like Ryan, we were talking over the last couple of weeks, at our scout school that we do together, is knowing the scheme and how players fit the scheme and how players translate from a 34 college scheme into a 43 base defense or vice versa is key to being able to project their productivity and their usefulness in the NFL and their careers in the NFL. If you don't know those schemes, like Murphy was saying earlier, if you don't know how your coaches are going to take this player and cook with them as an ingredient, then you're injuring that whole cupboard and you're making bad food go in there. So the most successful teams, like Murphy was saying, that find late round draft picks, stay genuine to who their guy is. Like, is he a Steeler guy? Is he a Panther profile guy? Is he a Giant guy? Is he a Raider guy? Is it Mr. Davis used to ask us all the time, look us in the face and go, "David, is this a Raider? Is this a Raider? Can you tell me this guy will be a Raider?" And what that meant, and you knew what he wanted. He wanted the height, he wanted the weight, he wanted the speed, but he also wanted tenacity and a toughness to the guy. He wanted a guy that when he walked into a bar was winning the bar fight. He didn't want some pretty looking guy that's going to be, golden boy. He really didn't. He wanted guys that were tough and were going to walk in and win that bar fight. So without knowing that, you got to lean, without being able to sit in front of a kid and do an interview and watch him, you got to lean on your connections to tell you if it's that kind of guy. And you got to ask the right questions. And only veteran scouts really have been through the ringer enough, made enough mistakes to learn from them. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm no choir boy here, guys. I've made my mistakes on the road, and I've done things that are that are probably questionable, but I've learned from those mistakes, and then I've adapted, and now I've learned over 18-year career on how to ask the right questions, how to get the information my GM needs, whereas the fact collectors will go in and they're just not doing it right yet. But like Murphy, you were saying about Vernon Davis, I'll never forget Ed Dodds and I were working in the building together at the time at the Raiders, and Dodds got a tip about Vernon and just threw some college tape. He was a pro guy at the time, but he just threw some college tape on really quick just to check him out because one of his buddies was talking about him. He came out of his office and he grabbed me. He's like, dude, you got to see this kid. And I went into his office and he loved him on tape. And then as soon as he ran that 40, Mr. Davis started asking all the questions, and Ed Dodds was on the table for him. Ed Dodds loved him. From a young scout, Ed Dodds always had the eye. And he saw that guy and he loved him. He came out of his office just loving Vernon.
That's awesome.
I think the thing you said about the Washburn kid would make you wonder if you could ask philosophically the clubs that took these kids this year. If you did not have all of the info you had going into this time last year, does a guy like Kyle Dugar and a guy like Jeremy Chin, do they make it to where they got picked if that information is not readily available to those teams until much later in the process? Now, they may still get drafted. They may still even get drafted by those teams, but is there a likelihood that they're not seen as high of a prospect if you did not get that content until mid-late fall or other, type thing, right? If those schools don't play till the spring, and you're getting that information and then you're not seeing it, until next spring, and then you're drafting, right on top of each other, afterwards, do the small school kids who suffered already this year, what kind of world are they in with no junior day?
Well, again, Murphy, you asked your own question right there. It's like they're dead in the water. I mean, look at this year's draft. Ryan and I were talking about this with Rick and everybody one time. I think, was it 6 or 8 non-Power 5 guys really got drafted this year? You know what I mean?
It was 7 down from like the 13 on average over the last 8 years or something like that.
Right. And so you saw that the teams went with the ones they know. The ones that were, and again, combine drafting numbers were way higher than they had been in the past. There's 330 kids on average that get invited to the NFL Combine. There's 237 picks or 35 picks most drafts. Most people don't even realize that. They think they got a ticket to the dance at the Combine, they're getting drafted. No, 100 kids that go to the Combine don't get drafted, okay? Just so you guys understand that. But that being said, this year's Combine, it was like if you were there, man, you were on the draft list because they had a verified medical, they had verified numbers on you, they had a verified 40 on you, they had an interview with you, somebody sat and talked to you, they had the videotape of your interview, they could have their psychologist at least look at that interview and break that down. They couldn't bring anybody in the facilities, they couldn't rub and tug on anybody that later they got interest on. There was no workout warriors that went and ran really good pro days at smaller colleges that got brought in for physicals later. So what did you see? You saw the whole draft process be Power 5 schools pretty much. And those were the guys that got drafted and pretty much signed even after the draft were the bigger school guys that they had the workups, they had the relationships, they could call those GMs, those medical staffs had entered all the medical into the database correctly so they could make an educated decision on them. Where smaller schools, if they don't play, do they furlough their athletic trainer? So now we can't even get the medical into the system that we need. Do they furlough their pro liaison because we're trying to save money where we can and we don't need that guy right now? I mean, all these questions come up like I talked about earlier. The ripple effects are still being, the ripples are still going, and we're finding more and more ripples to this process based on one droplet of water hitting the lake. It's a big lake, guys. The ripples haven't hit the shore yet. We don't know. They're still coming.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm going to invite my friends here, David Turner, John Murphy, to make their final statements, maybe a tidbit, just a nugget to kind of think about. Before I do, want to remind everybody here listening live, this Friday, as we are doing for the next 22 weeks still of our first course together, Friday Night Scout School, as David mentioned before. We're going to be breaking down everything you need to do in order to give yourself the necessary tools in the scouting field, improve your eye, agents. We're taking a look at every angle. We've been doing the defensive schemes over the last couple weeks, 4-3, 4-2-5, 3-4. Now we're really diving into interior defensive linemen. We have some college tape on Quinnen Williams coming out. We have some tape on Danny Shelton. We have some tape on DeForest Buckner coming out of Oregon. We got some stuff for you guys we're excited about for this week. So if you have not signed up already, that's 9 Eastern time on Friday. You can email myself at ryan@nfldraftbible.com, or as you see, Rise and Draft on Twitter. Just DM me. I'm very proactive with responding in that sense. Make sure to sign up for that tonight, Wednesday, 9 Eastern time as well. Brian Baldinger will be on with me again for Baldy's Breakdowns. We're talking wide receivers tonight. Little Randy Moss, Devontae Adams, Michael Thomas. We're breaking down some of the best in the game today, some of the best seasons in the past as well. Any players out there? I know we talked about the uncertain times, right? The verified measurables that we talked about a little bit in the past couple minutes. If you are still an unsigned free agent that needs an opportunity, Marvin Jones is running the free agency database for NFL Draft Bible. Again, you can reach out to myself, Rick Saratella, Marvin Jones directly. Make sure to at least explore the possibilities. On that note, though, John, I'm going to start with you. Just something to think about for the viewers as we kind of wind down here.
Well, I think we got 24 more hours before we find out who's opted out, or I guess opted in, or which way they decide to go with that. So I think that'll make it very interesting to then look at the rosters, look at the rookies that were drafted this year and last year to see how new guys might now influence a roster differently. Because as we've seen in the last couple of days, a few of those opt-outs, especially offensive tackles opting out. As Dave mentioned, if Drew Brees wakes up one morning and a few of his linemen are not playing, he may decide to not dress that week, or at least hand off most of the time when if that happens. So it'll be very interesting to see if these opt-outs have any cause and effect, and would we start seeing a few other veteran guys that may have thought that they had gone off to greener pastures start to get re-signed, and it'll be, I think, a very interesting 24 hours here, that if they're going to hold on to that August 6th date, will we see a rush of guys in the next 24 hours decide to opt out?
And David, kind of moving over to you, your last thing to think about for the viewers.
My last thing to think about is just think about your health, everybody, and the safety and health of everybody out there. Like, wear your mask, wash your hands. And if you're a young man that, really want to know if you should sit or not, you're welcome to contact me at Math Sports. It's on the screen. We can help you out. We can help you work through the decision. The decision is going to ultimately be yours, but we're here to help you guys make the decision, an educated one. So we're here for you. We're excited to help you do that. And again, this week coming up, we got the interior hog malas ready for action, lined up at Friday Night Scout School, which is always an exciting time, and I can't wait. We're going to get, like Ryan said, we're going to, if you're a scout, if you're a coach, if you're an agent that just wants to learn it, or maybe you're just a defensive lineman that's always wondered how we evaluate you, and you're maybe a D tackle, and you're like, you know what? Guess what? You can buy our Ryan said we have 22 weeks left, but you can buy it a la carte. So maybe this is the one class that you want to tune in and watch to understand how we're going to evaluate you as a D lineman. And you say, this is what I need to know. Come sign up. I think it's like $35. Do it and learn what it is as scouts we're looking at. We're going to go over the 0, 1, 2i, and 4i, I think. So, you're going to see 4 different types of techniques in the run game and in the pass game, what we see as successful, and we're going to break it down and do all scouting on them this Friday night. So hopefully you guys take advantage of that, take advantage of the whole 22 weeks coming up of this course to get better educated on what scouting is and what we're looking at when we're evaluating you guys.
Yep. Awesome point there. Again, as David said, individually, you can grab the seminars as we come, you can take the full course. We're going to be starting to break down every single position now, starting with these interior defensive linemen. So for myself, David Turner, John Murphy, NFL Draft Bible, Rick Saratella, shout out as always. We appreciate you guys coming along. We'll be here again tomorrow, 9 Eastern time, and the rest of the week. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in. Hope to see you again tomorrow.